We are heirs of the Roman Empire. We do not even realize what the effects of their activities are visible to this day. In fact, Greek culture was lost in the Roman traditions and remained only visible in art. Idiotic loves, exploitation, imperialism, and even Nazis are also the legacy of the Roman Empire. Wherever Rome went, it carried its ideology in a rather bloody way. Arminius, better known as Herman since Second World War, when authorities wanted to make him even more German than he was, just like Marbod, is rarely mentioned in Eastern Europe. This is due to the fact that he is associated with Adolf Hitler in our part of the world. At the same time, they referred to the Roman Empire. In this way, they even contradicted themselves. Maybe not Marbod, but Arminius was certainly turned over in his grave during that era. Hitler had no formal education, but he made up for it perfectly by reading. World symbolism fascinated him mostly. The swastika is by no means a symbol invented by Nazi Germany, as ignorant politicians try to make it out, because it existed thousands of years earlier in the cultures of Mesoamerica and India. Hitler didn't really invent anything new, but he sold it in a new setting. Even the famous hand gesture came from ancient Rome. It was performed by gladiators in the famous Ave Caesar Morituri to salute before the games. Nevertheless, we certainly underestimated these two, because we can safely say that thanks to these two, the Roman Empire did not get to our part of the world, site of Rhine and modern Czech. In fact, these two, perhaps unknowingly, formed the borders on the Roman Empire on the Rhine. Marcation lines will not appear until the Hadrian. This is the first ever delineation of borders on a map. To this day, this is not the best solution. But somehow people did not want to think about a new one. As we know, nations don't always live according to the borders. Not all nations have their own country either. I wouldn't blame Commodus for leaving the city he founded, Vienna, today Vienna, after his cynical dad Marcus Aurelius finally died. When I was writing my book, I analyzed many sources related to Commodus. Marcus Aurelius was adored because he was a man of the Senate. Commodus, of the people. Unfortunately, the Roman chronicles are a propaganda as today's media, and they were written by senators. He also had ties to Christianity, screwed up many corrupt types of senators who openly exploited their positions. By the end of bribery, he was indeed hated. He as well wanted to finish fire in the city of Rome and build house for poverties of adobe. Senators see nothing good in that, because simply they didn't interest in the situation of poverty. Certainly to those Romans who could do nothing more than fighting, the ruler who wanted to end the war with the descendants of Marbod was not on hand, because they will have nothing to do. But the truth is that it was Aurelius who made a huge hole in the budget. It was Aurelius who finished off the state with his wars, and in his private life nothing of his philosophy was used. He was the family tyrant, and it's strange that few historians recognize it, and most still idolize him. Many people who praise these tracks that I know are just as hypocritical as he was. The famous is as well his wife, anyway, his greatest marriage. They both slept with gladiators. Exists that possibility that Commodus never was his son, and maybe that's why Aurelius hated him, and no one hid it in the Roman Empire as well. Is the Battle of Teutoburg Forest important to us? For our point of view, yes, because it stopped the Roman movement. It established the border of the Roman Empire on the Rhine. The Germans stopped their march to the east. Thanks to them, Rome did not reach us. Trade relations will be established, but the earliest coins which we find remember Commodus. The Romans already wrote about Galicia. They also know the Sarmatians and appreciated their belligerence. The Sarmatians have nothing to do with Poland. Let's not confuse the concept with the ideology of Sarmatism. The Sarmatis inhabited nowadays Ukraine. I tempted to say that the modern nations living in these areas are not like contemporary Germans, people who cannot think for themselves, who can be told anything, absolutely will not go beyond the letter of the law. We owe this to that, and also in a sense to the Iron Curtain. We had to think to survive. Of course, sometimes the Sclavinia is shaming too much. Fortunately, since some of these countries became part of the Union, and in fact they changed into a cheap labor force, it has been observed that each year is worse with thinking and education as well. People have indeed stopped thinking for themselves. Of course, that wasn't always the case. The Germans got into bad habits when, after the conquest of the Roman Empire, they got too excited about this creation and believed that the Holy Roman Empire easily the height of previous creation. Surely, in Odoacer time, they could think for themselves. If they hadn't, this revolution will not end like that. This creation wouldn't survive. After all, they used to deal and a trick. The most famous trick and using property of Attila. Stalin's famous parable perfectly reflects the mentality. When all the members of German Communist Party delegation did not come to the party meeting because there was no conductor to validate the ticket. There is a huge gap between Austrian and German. Yes, of course, I as well know that story. Many people from that part of the world did something like that. When they hid, for example, Jews or did something wrong according to that, they simply wrote on the doors or on the gate that in-house is typhus. And any German didn't go into even thinking about cross the gate. It rescued many lives. Hitler would never have to come to the power in Austria. This is felt to this day. Personally, I didn't anchor Nazis in Austria nowadays. Not so much as I did in Germany. It's better not to mention their estern and neighbors, where thanks poverty, Nazis really open now many gates, and it's dangerous because Nazis gone with poverty. We must certainly touch on the topic of the origin of the Slavs. Definitely write what is possible to read in the elementary books to the history university. All the peoples of the world came out of India in succession. By the way, this India is really large, but I didn't think it could accommodate so many nations, because after all it would be good to have a pair of Adam and Eve from each nation. It's really interesting. This is of course theory. Unfortunately, elementary school teachers and education minister hated any changes in elementary books. As a result, people learn and repeat over and over again outdated facts. New theory, actually it's not new theories, but it wasn't popular theory throughout the ages, based on archaeological research, or taught only in college, and not everyone in college or after when they gone to university has an extensive history course. I'm for the second theory. Slavs are a mix of peoples who moved to that part of the world. Lombards. Then they will move to France and Italy, of course, but at the beginning we heard about Lombards in that part of the world. Vandals, Huns, Scythians, Celts, and Germans. Vandals sometimes are known as Germans, sometimes as Scots, perhaps also Sarmatians. One of the theories believes that Sarmatians were Tatars, and another that it is a tribe of Scythians. During the reign of Marbod, the Saxons lived in these areas. Unfortunately, in our nomenclature called the Polabian culture, to the Asiatic five names. Unfortunately, very confusing. Better is to use international names, and I think that it should be stopped because it brings mistakes. Lusatian culture at that time was Vandals and Celts. And we know that the Vandals will go with Marbod. Also the Lugia, whoever they were, sometimes called as well Polabian culture, but that idea is not so popular. Sincerely, we have no idea who were Lugian. Some authors of Eastern especially was associated with the trend of Slavic superiority can state that the Avesta is their book and the Saxons were Slavs. For sure not. The Latin term of area currently inhabited by the so-called Slav is Sclavinia. It comes from Sclavus and simply means slave. Country of slaves. Indeed, let us not deny that first Slavic non-dynasties lived off the trade of their own people. We know the first dynasties of all countries from the Dark Ages. It may or may not have been done on a large scale before. The Przemyśl dynasty was invalid here, but later were Kievan Rus and the Piast dynasty in this matter. People sold their own children, hoping to give them a better life as well, and sometimes it really was like that, sometimes not. The Germans gave them to Rome. It's just a prettier name. Both nations did actually the same. However, let's not look at it throughout the prism of today's times. Children really gained value in the 20th century, especially when we consider Central and Eastern Europe. people will simply think that they might have another children. Children weren't cared for like they are today. Hungarians or Tatars are not Slavic nations either. Hungarians are being crammed into different ethnic groups of languages, but it is difficult for science. We have to accept that they come from the Huns. These stories are also refuted by the Balts. The inhabitants of today's Kaliningrad, the indigenous people of this region, were Balts. Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania as well. Of course, there is a Slavic language now in Kaliningrad, but the languages of the Balts are completely different to the Slavic languages. They are also classified differently, but they don't really fit into any of a group. The so-called Southern Slavs sound completely different, almost like the Latin languages. The stories about the origin of the population were created in the 19th century and were one of the few beginnings of the Nazis, which we will mention one day, unfortunately still repeated. Different to the series Marbod as well was in Teutoburg Forest. Marbod was the lord of the lands in the present-day Czech. Arminius was about 1,000 kilometers away. They were united by more than they divided. But naturally, when two such strong personalities came to power, the alliance had to fall apart. For two, such a separation of powers is not possible. Both ended up in Rome as prisoners. As a gift of their parents, yes, but in some way it was prisoners. Difficult to call it as well a prisoners because they took education. They were changed at Roman. Something ugly what still happened during wars and. Was used mostly during Second World War. To change their mentality, of course, to create them at Romans and brought that culture to their land. They received their education there and at the same time watched. This is just the beginning, but it's safe to say that by introducing more and more Germans into the army, Rome formed a whip on itself. It was only a matter of time when someone like Odoaker would come. Arminius was not such a person at all, a seasonal player yet. In Rome is still a strong man, Octavian Augustus. The chances were low then. Today, two both men are reminded that they did not go to Gallia. Autumn was coming, and besides, Gallia wasn't ready to drop the Romans yet. It wouldn't have worked with Augustus and Tiberius, but really they did a lot. We have another player here, Varus. Probably, if he returned to Rome, Augustus would do to him what Tiberius did to Pilate. What in Asian culture is called the pinnacle of incompetence. He has reached a position in his career that is beyond him. He absolutely should not occupy it. There are many jokes in history, but undoubtedly one of the greatest is that the remains of huge golden bed of Varus were found on the battlefield. This man, attacked by the enemy, instead of abandoning unnecessary things and moving as fast as possible, as drunk as possible, drags a heavy bed behind him because he cannot imagine sleep on the ground. The pinnacle of idiocracy. This Roman line is 15 kilometers long. Line normally like in the 90s for the petrol when the wall fell. I don't know what this man was hoping for. He must have known perfectly well that the Roman sword was not suitable for hand-to-hand fight. The Roman sword is the progenitor of the scalpel. It stabs and only stabs. You need a lot of movement to cut with it. Riders have other swords. Yes, they are suitable for killing. But in the time of Varus, the order derived from the phalanx still reigns. When the Romans tried to create their famous starters, they painfully discovered that they couldn't make the right moves to extend the sword beyond the shields. Their war tactics failed completely. That war tactic was good just in the battlefield. If Arminius or Marbod hadn't met it, it would probably be different. Perhaps there happened something similar to what happened in Ireland, although probably on a larger scale. We know that Caesar tried to conquer Ireland. We already know this from the excavations, but he failed. Rome never mentioned those conquests that didn't work out for them. The reason for this was quite simple. It was wrong to inform people that there was someone more powerful out there, and chronicles were propaganda or powerful and greatest of Roman Empire. The Irish must have later them. After all, Germanicus had a triumph after returning from Germany. I thought he fell very badly. Varus did not understand these people at all. He introduced wiping, which in this culture was an insult. He even placed coat over a stolen hen. His typical painstaking bureaucrat from Asterix in Rome. It worked in Jerusalem or Parthia, where he fought before, but not there. And he treated the nobility like that as well. Analyzing his behavior, it can be said that he treated these people as the inhabitants of the Middle East with whom he had dealings. He has absolutely no idea about Germans, which is surprising considering that he raised Arminius. I thought, on the other hand, only Rome existed and the rest is barbarian. Idiots in principle. It's a bit like with evacuation of St. Petersburg. Instead of the people is a piano and a barge with people loyal to the system in that case, and here it's a master went to the bottom. He is an example of vanity and blindness of those who follow a fool. We have to clear something up. We call it the Battle of Teutoburg Forest, but it was a few engagements similar to the Picts. If I remember correctly, there were at least 3 of these battles, and in fact the last one at built by Germans had led the battle. A column was split in the forest. Varus moved quite strangely. Historians to this day wonder why he also took prostitutes, merchants, and all his possessions with him. He wasn't going to settle anywhere, at least according to the chronicles. The famous wall cut off the Romans and forced a battle in the field. Sincerely, I see no reason to believe that this wall was built by a Roman. It's a bit like the Antonius wall. I will show you it in the pictures later. It looks like a road through the forest now. You don't know is that you are working in a very historic place without marks. There are marks outside the forest, and you work on Antonius wall. Today it's a slightly raised forest road. And these areas, even deep in of Ukraine or Russia, we find traces of wood and earth fortifications. These people didn't build concentrated brick buildings, but that doesn't mean they lived outdoors. It's not the river. The largest relics of wooden ramparts were found in the Czech Republic. It's believed that this is a Marbod city. The series changes history like every series. Unless at the moment we have a story about the first later mysterious clash of Tiberius with Arminius. Little is known about it except that it was expensive. It was then that Germanicus Cotillon from Gaul Belgica, state of Germania, was created. This is as well propaganda, because Germania will never be conquered, and Gaul Belgica, even after changed name, wouldn't be Germania. It shows us a naval battle in which the Germans were attacked by the Saxons and the Romans, if it was to be the river Ems. Tusnelda is no more than she had been kidnapped and taken to the Ravenna area. Pregnant, well, a wise queen will not be caught kidnapping a baby. This may seem abnormal in today's mentality, but in those days there was not such attachment, especially to infants. Child mortality caused it. Tusnelda could have had many turmerics. Germanicus will finally be recalled by Tiberius from expeditions because of plundering virile Germania. The reason is simple. Tiberius was known as miser. He analyzed the pills. And he probably also afraid of competition or thought someone else would kill him. In the same place, Arminius and Caecina will confront each other. The ill-fated battle on the river Weser after the departure of Germanicus. Rome began to do what it could do best. It was draping venom throughout Drusus month. Two parties emerged. Some of the tries sank after Marbod and some after Arminius. Arminius defeated Marbod in the Hercynian forest. This is the second slaughter in the history of Arminius. I visited that place many years ago. My father worked in these areas. This wouldn't probably have happened without Drusus' promptings. Marbod became weakened, which Catualda took advantage of. With the help of the gods, he overthrew Marbod. What's so funny? The gods at that time lived in Pomerania, which today is the part of Poland, not in Spain. They will move there later. It shows the migration of the peoples, and it confirms that with this thesis is something wrong with old theories. Marbod moved to Ravenna, where he lived his doomsday in luxury. He certainly had no idea that in few hundred years Ravenna would be a Germanic kingdom and Rome would disappear. Arminius died at the hands of his own family. It's doubtful that Tusnelda will return. She tried to meet Marbod. Arminius died when he wanted to declare himself a king. Drusus and Germanicus will be poisoned. The second monster, skilled in the history of Rome, enters at the stage. Agrippina. In fact, with the death of Nero, we can talk about the fall of the empire. That's true. This creation will die slowly, but it is juggernaut, and juggernaut without a strong ruler must fall. I don't know if Marbod was a homosexual. He could be asexual too. People forget that the lack of self need also exists, and such people are the best politicians because no one can break them. Frederick the Great was asexual. They would probably make him gay too, but he emphasized his sexual preferences in his memories. We won't ask Marbod. You weren't there, so let's not attribute to him something what we don't know about. His capital can be visited in the Czech Republic. Neither Philip of Macedonia was so dangerous for the Athenians, nor Pyrrhus of Epirus, nor Antiochus of Syria for the Roman people as Marbod was for Italy because of the proximity and bravery of his people. Something like what told Tiberius. And I say this with great appreciation because I consider Marbod to be a great personality, like Arminius, although he is not so much popular here. Marbod is more popular simply because he existed on the territory of Czech. And wasn't used so much during Second World War like Arminius. It is important. I wonder what Tiberius would say about Arminius. Yes, the legendary mule. Well, he should have listened to this mule. Do you ride the horse? Well, I used to ride too, but today I would need Arabian saddle. Yeah, but you have damaged the only good leg. By what coach? People only have two of them, but this and the first cause me to require a different saddle. And you didn't kill me with that fracture. Well, like folded. Rated it was the falling roof of my apartment that could have killed you and your family. I didn't plan this either. It didn't hurt. There is not so much pain in this disease. It's a plus of this disease. But you are a little bit like with leprosy. I don't feel the pain. Just that it's not curable, it's not contagious at all, genetic insomnia, not because it's not insomnia like people thinking. You will take a pills, try something, watch something, and you will sleep. Genetic insomnia will not disappear after what so helpful words of ignorance. Simply because mine hasn't informed that need to sleep. All members of equine family, like cats, can sense certain movements of the ground under their hooves. And they also know better if they have solid ground under their, let's call it legs. The Moors did not want to go. It was necessary to obey or not to carry all the possessions and by no means warriors. The strategy of both men is taught similarly to the Tutmosis Armageddon at all military schools and majors related to politics. Teached about it. In fact, it was end of the world because, according to the legend, it was to come with a second battle of Megiddo, Armageddon, and it was under Rames II. That's why the world looks like this. Maybe it's over. We have just debunked one of our myths again about Armageddon. I see no reason to stop teaching about Arminius, the Polish man who lived centuries before Hitler and Hitler's ideology. Only his image was used, and then rarely. He had nothing to do with it. Without Arminius and Marbod, for sure, that part of the world would be part of Roman Empire.